First talk after lunch is my friend Warwick Gill, who is not like the rest of us. He's an analyst. He's not a designer. He's also here to offend us a little bit, I'm guessing. Cool, sorry. Cool. But thanks very much. Welcome, Warwick.
Cool. Thanks for that very long and detailed introduction. Faraz mentioned, I'm an analyst. Amongst other things, I'm also an architect, and pretty much anything that needs to get done, I can do it. I have been working in digital for probably about the last 8 or 9 years though, and have had quite a bit of experience with designers, even not actually one myself. I had to grow this beard, so that at least they'd let me in with my Sony watch and my HP. I had to pretty much rewire everything here because it was all Apple. But at least it worked first time, which you guys probably don't understand. So my main job today is really to just put a bit of a different spin on things. It is a sponsor talk, so I'm here representing Free Thinking, the premier sponsor. So traditionally, it should be presenting research that we've done, trying to study some of our products and all of that, and pretty much choosing the best in a particular industry to come and speak. Fortunately, as Faraz mentioned, I'm not a designer. We have a website, so you can get the sales from there. I'm not a salesman. And we actually don't do any research, so I'm presenting other people's research. But in a nutshell, my hypothesis is that design in South Africa is broken. I wasn't here this morning, so I haven't had the opportunity to listen to the other speakers, but looking at the Twitter feed, it seems like there's been quite a bit already spoken around becoming more agile, getting a little bit less precious around the upfront work, and finding new ways of doing things, so simplifying and shutting things down. And I think some of the focus of what I'm going to be speaking about today will actually add to that and support it in some way, shape or form. But before we get into that, the reasons why I say design is broken. So it's an aging population with very limited inflow. So think China with a lot less volume. If you look at the demographics, this was work done by Jason Hobbs and various others around the UX landscape in South Africa. But really very, very few people between the ages of 23 and 26. Most of them around about my age, getting to midlife crisis, and then sort of tapering off towards the old farts because they don't understand much about IT. But you've got a serious problem with supply. You've got an inflated skill or inflated view of your skills and seniority. So if you look at it purely based on a sort of years of experience type perspective, and look at where individuals have rated themselves in the survey, people who are rating themselves as senior and beyond, where they're probably mid, there's a similar kind of a view in terms of the range of skills that have been able to be demonstrated. It's not necessarily capability, but experience in implementing them. There's a gap. So the market doesn't know much. People who do have some elements of skill are able to sell it well. The net result, people are possibly overrating where they are in international comparisons. Research and user testing is undervalued. I think this is probably largely based on organizations where people work and less necessarily about the individuals. But I would argue that there's a lot of responsibility to try and alter that and to try and change it within this room. And possibly a few hints that I can give around how to do that a little bit later on. But if you look at, you're not supposed to really focus on the stats directly, but it's certainly not a part of every project. And if you look at some of the issues that have been identified, and now my tech fails, don't worry about the small print, but really, there's no buy-in for UX. People don't understand. There's not enough time up front to do the user research. These are the types of things that have come out. The value is not understood by the organizations where you work. And the good news with that is that you're not alone. So one of the things that I think any emerging community doesn't do particularly well, and it's definitely prevalent here, is actually looking at other industries that have had similar experiences. So look at IT architecture. They've been the bottleneck. The people complaining of the fact that there isn't enough time to do architecture properly, you can't do anything until you've done the following. And they've slowly been sidelined in organizations, and rightly so, because they actually stop the creativity and they stop the process. IT has spent the last 30 years fighting to be valid business partners at the table. The whole agile movement, I saw there was some talk on agile earlier this morning, but the same story. There's a whole organizational change that needs to go with it to make it effective. And from what I've seen from the communities, I think this is one of the first sessions that's actually stepping a little bit outside just the designers and starting to invite business people and starting to involve the consumers of your product. And I think that, for a community that is all about understanding users and understanding what needs to be put forward to them, we don't do it very well ourselves in terms of understanding our value to organizations. How do we articulate that? And how do we actually create that value for the organization? So I think sometimes we are our own worst enemy. This is an earlier point as well, but supply is severely limited. What that means is salaries are escalating. So you probably would have noticed that over the last couple of years. And did anyone say bubble? This is a well-known economic term, but essentially it's an economic cycle that's characterized by a rapid escalation in asset prices followed by a contraction. We are in that phase now, my personal opinion, where we're actually seeing the escalation of the asset price, and I'm not convinced that the underlying value of the asset is in place yet. Welcome to come and throw things at me after this, but that's kind of the evidence that I'm starting to see in the marketplace. So eventually, the demand is going to taper off, salaries are going to drop, people are going to be unemployed. At the moment, employment is very good, unless, and I think this is hopefully the good news, one or two things in the organization and in the industry actually change. So, it's this yoga thing. Okay, so the demand at the moment is primarily for wireframing and prototyping. As an organization, we engage with many corporates. We've got lots of designers, and the majority of the work that's being requested is really a projectized work, producing wireframes, prototyping information, and it very seldom actually moves beyond that. The question that I have for the community is, how do we change that? I'm a big supporter, hence the we, and I have been working with you guys for 8 years, but it's, something has to change in what we do that allows for people to move into those new spaces. So there's a lot of frustration in our organization, and I think in other organizations, where people feel undervalued, they're not doing the work they want to be doing, they're not given the opportunities they want to, and the reality is they don't currently exist in the marketplace in any significant quantity. There's also a lot of preciousness about the skill. So, people don't want to share. They don't want business analysts doing what they perceive as their job. They don't, there's this closedness of people wanting to hang on and not let go, because that's where the work is right now. The reality, once you've got the basic user journeys in place, a couple of page types, all of your components in play, understand what's foreground, midground, background, analysts can iterate within that model. UX can provide a quality assurance, much like architecture should if it works in the proper way. And it allows you guys to leverage up to the place where you can really add genuine value in the user research, the understanding of utilization, understanding of behavior, and feeding that back in. So, by holding on to that stuff and not allowing to leverage within the organizations you work, you're essentially keeping yourself stuck. So, one of my own personal mottos is to always try and work myself out of a job. And I think it's something that we're not particularly good at here. Something else that's sort of impeding, data-driven decisions. What data? The rest of the world is looking at big data. We don't even understand how to use our current data. How many of your projects that you work on have got the actual recording of utilization, any element of heat mapping, a way to pull back that information from a learning perspective, to actually introduce that back into the next iteration. And these are some of the sort of tricks that you can use to have lower research up front. The concept of fail fast. We don't have anything that actually allows us to do that in a meaningful way. It's also a bit of a problem with the culture in the country. We are not a country that really tolerates failure, other than maybe Jay-Z. But, and we're not a learning organization or a learning country. If we were, Jay-Z's speechwriter would have learned to write numbers out normally. So, and that's my only dig at him for today. Okay, switching. So, these types of concepts, you would have heard about it this morning, but, MVP, failing fast. Technical debt has an equivalent in design debt. An iterative approach. It doesn't have to be perfect before you start. And the kind of impression that I get from most of the designers I speak to is that, that's development shit. It's not what designers do. We make things right. We make things perfect. We are very skilled at managing technical debt these days. If you look at agile projects, it comes into the backlog, it moves through, it gets prioritized, it moves on. There is no reason why we can't do the same with design. There's no reason why you need a heavy research phase up front. Go with your gut, build in the measurements, test, feed it back, and carry on working. So I think, there are mechanisms out there that can support. It's just a case of being open and wanting to learn from it. And then I think, most importantly, now I'm switching to manual, is that, the value of design cannot be articulated. I can't really speak for everyone in the room, but I think I've heard it articulated once well, and that was in my days in Investec. And I think since then, most people, they really struggle to tell you what you're going to get out of what you're investing. Excuse me for a sec. And I think possibly more important than that, and this speaks to the data, it can't really be measured either. So if you think of where you guys are right now, there's a big hype cycle in South Africa. Everybody wants UX. Nobody understands UX. They can see the value in the interfaces that are produced. Often it's the prettiness factor. I mean, I've literally had some people talk to UX designers and say, oh yeah, you're the guys who make it look pretty. In current projects where these guys have been working for 3 years and have done brilliant core work. So there's a hole there, there's a challenge, and we've got to find a way to articulate the benefit that we produce, to measure that, to feed it back, and to keep on expanding. Stealing a little bit from Gibbs, because they use this a lot, and for a sec I'm probably going to go what some people would consider a little bit off-piste, but essentially there's a country level, there's an organizational level, there's a community level, which is what we're in over now, and then there's a personal level. The country level is something that most people ignore because we have very little influence. The control is obviously you've got most control over what you personally do. You've got very little control over what the country does. But the harsh reality is that company performance is more driven by GDP than it is by any other single determining factor. So we can't afford to ignore what's going on at the country level. You take India as a prime example. Probably 5-6 years ago, there was a big drive to get into BPO in South Africa, and we were going to be the next India. And everyone thought, cool, we'll just put in some tax breaks, and it will just emerge. India started that journey 30 years ago. They started with education. They started with incentivizing the areas, and it wasn't driven by the government. It was driven by a bunch of people who owned IT companies who got together and said, guys, this has to change. And they lobbied the government, and they changed the government, and then the policies came into play. As South Africans, we're very accepting of, it's outside of what we can do. The question that I'm posing is, how do you get to the point where as a community you can start changing organizations, you can start changing the priorities in the country, and you can start getting investment into the right areas. So we know that there aren't any formal training courses, but it's looking at a university level is too late. How do you pull the guys out of the school system? And I've recently done a lot of research on the school system, but it's like big banks. It's designed to crush creativity. Sorry to anyone who represents the big banks. Sometimes I get passionate, but it's you've got to get them whilst they're still young, and I won't use the other analogy for that. So I've spoken a bit about control. Obviously, the impact that it have on the community is the inverse, and that's where the challenge lies. Is that by changing what happens in organizations in the country and in the community, has a much greater impact on what you do on a day-to-day basis than necessarily changing what you personally do, because that's what creates the environment that you can work in. So the question is, how do you balance those two, and how do you actually get to a point where it can be sustainable? So going a little bit off, if you look at the country level again, these are the South African sectors that are measured. You'll see the highest value in there is about 21% for financial services, and its contribution to GDP growth. So anywhere in there, do you see anything related to UX, to design, to manufacturing? If you think of what this country focuses on, our unemployment issue, manufacturing, all of those sorts of components, they also need design. But nowhere in there can you see the contribution of UX to our GDP. To contrast that, and this comes out from a report in the UK, the UX design economy generated 71.7 billion for the UK in 2013, I think it was. It grew faster than the UK average. There are stats around the productivity of design workers being 41% more productive than your average worker in terms of actually generating the GVP. Your companies that just leverage design, even if they don't have a huge design area, have a much higher than average productivity per employee. And I can attest to this. We've been running agile projects for 3 odd years now with designers embedded into the teams. The productivity gain that you get from your business analyst is massive, because looking at a 300 decision point Visio diagram, you get 0 useful value from the business being fed back to you, and I do mean 0. They will look at it, they will try and understand it, and eventually they'll say, yep, too much detail, just go with it. Looking at one wireframe that you can click through changes the whole dynamic in the room, and you start getting genuine value. So, my analysts wireframe. They don't do it as well as designers do, but they can get the basics out there. I've got a Samsung tablet. I can push out wireframes to get discussion going in seconds in a meeting and publish it, and people can be looking at stuff. What that does to the project lifecycle and how it crunches it and how it gets valuable info from the business users is incredible. If you want to start talking to how design changes organizations, what value it brings, it's in that productivity gain alone justifies the salaries and the people that are being brought in. But we don't talk about that because we're too concerned about the craft. And we're too concerned about, is this perfect? Is the user journey in place? Have I done the research? What adds value to the business? So yeah, even though it contributed 7.3% of total UK exports, now those numbers are, forget the absolute value of the GDP, but there aren't numbers that big in terms of sector growth in our country, bar I think probably the top 4 or 5. And this is just the UX and design industry in the UK. So it can be a meaningful contributor. How do we get this kind of information to the people who are deciding, what courses are coming in play, what our education system needs to look like, and how do we start training people up to actually make this an industry that can compete? The other thing that you bring to the party that very few people do is the understanding of human behavior. Now, bringing this into an organization is difficult. I'll be the first one to admit that, because you're challenging the core of what people believe they know and where they add value. So to tell a salesperson they don't understand their client, it doesn't go down very well until you start showing evidence. But there are trends that our organizations are not seeing, that the country is not seeing. I was working with some insurance teams probably about a month ago, just doing some design thinking around how to solve their core problem. And they were coming to me with questions like, what will asset finance look like in 5 years' time? That was the problem they were trying to solve. In 5 years' time, you're not going to be financing assets. You're going to be financing usage. The whole collaborative consumption model of people not owning stuff anymore. How does that impact banks? How does it impact insurance companies? That's information that you guys have at your fingertips. It's knowledge through the way that you work that you get. Social media, still largely misunderstood. And that is the additional value add that you bring into a business. That's what starts causing structural changes to strategy. One of the problems that I didn't dig into, but that was mentioned in the research, is the whole needing to get to that strategy layer and needing to start influencing company strategy. This is how you do it, by putting stuff on the table that people don't know, they don't understand, and by helping them interpret the sort of impact of that to their day-to-day business. Insurance is going to wake up. They always do. And there will be a mad rush to get things in place. But what if one of the companies could start now? It could make a completely different scenario. I mean, the end of apps is a final destination. I don't know about you guys, but I very seldom open apps on my phone anymore. Everything is driven through to my watch. It notifies me. The initial config is in the app, but really I don't care about the app after that. It is a trend that's emerging. It is a trend that's going to change the way that people work. It is, and also the way that we need to design. Artificial intelligence. You don't need humans to make decisions anymore. If you don't need a human to make a decision, why do you need an interface? The core of the industry is shifting. and what are we doing to understand that and to understand how we build that back into human behavior. And then that all leads down to really understanding the value of time. So, the reason why I don't go into apps is not because I dislike the apps or because they're not friendly, but because I actually don't have the time. And there's too much going on. I need, stuff comes to me these days. I don't go anywhere anymore. So in terms of a little bit more detail on measuring the design value, I've spoken quite a lot about process improvement. But in the design space, I would argue it's probably development space, should I say, probably as much as 50%, even without doing any stats on it. The speed at which information gets processed, and it's not only the speed, it's the quality. It's the quality of the input, it's the quality of the feedback, it's the quality of the end product. That alone justifies design. The reduction in waste, another agile type concept, but taking a big process and implementing it and deciding 3 months later when the business looks at a solution for the first time that it's wrong, wastes millions every time you do it. Doing that in 2-week increments is a massive mind shift for businesses. And then obviously there's more fluffy stuff around user interaction, and you can prove that people are using it, and market adoption and customer satisfaction that no one really knows how to quantify or qualify, but it does make certain areas feel quite good about themselves. But the reality is that it all comes down to data. And behind everything that we build, that we operationalize, there's got to be that step of, what data are we recording? How are we utilizing that data? How are we feeding that back into the system? And how do we learn and grow and continuously improve? So from a community perspective, my advice, I've been to a few of these forums, I've been to the World Architecture Forums. There's a very big focus on the core skill of design, and that's important. Don't lose that. But learn about business. Business cases aren't built on usable interfaces. They're built on revenue. They're built on reputation. They're built on changing client behavior. And if you can't talk to those business factors within your design, you're going to be limited in how far you can go and how much you can influence. It's a challenge for probably most careers that have emerged out of anything like IT. And if you can't do that, be prepared to admit it and partner. Some of the best design pods that I've seen has got somebody who is brilliant at design and doesn't want to care about business, but they know that. And they brought in somebody with good business acumen, and they brought in somebody else who can get stuff into development. And that's also fine. But realize that it's necessary, that you've got to surround yourself with those skills to make sustainable change in organizations. So I definitely recommend that, somewhere along the line within the communities, start bringing in that business focus, start bringing in understanding what it is that you're delivering, and what the value is to the end users. I've spoken a little bit around this, but learnings from communities with similar challenges. Architecture is probably the closest that I can see, and this is IT architecture, to having overcome some of the challenges, and in some cases not, that you guys are experiencing. So architects always want to design everything up front. They want to understand, they want to know, and then they start building. With the new Agile frameworks, they're just another participant. Your architecture emerges. They've introduced concepts of architectural debt. It's exactly the same terminology used in development, but it works the same way. And any secondary function in a business, marketing, HR, IT, you name them, they've got exactly the same challenges. And there are industries that are a lot more mature and that have spent many more years grappling with how to overcome it. So invite those people in, get them to talk around what they've done differently, how they've got their seats at the C table, and what they had to overcome to get there. And then the soft skills development. So many of the designers that I've worked with, some of the guys are absolutely brilliant, but if things don't go their way. The slamming of the doors and the throwing of the books, and you don't have permission to do that. You still live in a corporate world. The amount of good work that you undo every time somebody goes off the reservation is unbelievable, and you've got to start building that reputation again. And once again, I know some people are just like that, but then partner, work with people who can buffer that for you, and just be a lot more self-aware. you have to work with developers. Developers, they're very logical. They're going to hold you back. They're going to tell you stuff that is possible. They're going to say isn't possible. They've also got their personality quirks, as do analysts. But you know, you've got to learn to work with those people. So focus on those soft skills. Realize that it's important. You can't get by purely on design skill. You are going to be limited. And then, you know, my last point on that is really just, you know, as a community, adapt to the changing market needs. So right now, the market need is around wireframing. You've got to drive the next wave. And, you know, part of it, change the market. Part of it, when you see the shifts, move in with it and change. So it's, you know, the community has been talking about the same stuff for the 8 years that I've been involved. And it's great intellectual debate. But, you know, how do you stop debating and start changing? And then on a personal level, and most of this, any of you who've been in IT will understand this. I mean, speak English, for crying out loud. It's, you know, these are people who don't understand pixels. They don't necessarily know what a user journey is. You know, the want to use your own jargon and to not explain it, it gives this false sense of power because people have to come to you for stuff. It is a lot more powerful to actually share that so that they don't have to come to you, because it allows you to move into the other things that you want to do. I've spoken about teaching others. You know, the business analyst community is in trouble. You know, business analysis has changed dramatically. The need for your thud factor is gone at last. And they're also struggling to adapt. How do we work better with designers to create something that is more scalable? Your skill set is rare. The business analyst skill set isn't. So how do you take some of your more, the analysts, if they're only in the room, are going to hate me, mundane tasks that are iterative and analytical, and farm them out? You know, get other people doing them for you. It's get people to iterate within your frameworks and allow you to move up to the level where you're influencing strategy. Because it's a win-win. The analysts are going to be out of jobs if that doesn't happen, and you're going to be stuck in your job if it doesn't happen. Compromise where required. I think I've beaten that horse to death. And more guidance, less control. You know, it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to fail. It's okay to let other people run with something for a while, but be there to make sure it stays on the right path. Learn the business and partner. I mean, it's a lesson from my own career. I have some pretty good strengths. I have some pretty shocking weaknesses. Probably 5 years ago, I discovered that it was pointless trying to work on my weaknesses, and I just need to find people who buffer them. I will always have a strong project manager. I will always have a strong Scrum Master, because I'm all over the place. I mean, for me to have just stayed slightly on point with the slides is quite an achievement. You know, I see squirrels everywhere. So, you know, you just surround yourself with people who don't see squirrels and who can keep you focused. And that, you know, that really is something that the community needs to learn. There are lots of people who believe in the value, who believe in what can be done, and who want to help. Use them. There's nothing wrong with it. So in summary, you know, how do we avoid the bubble? And it's basically change the value of the underlying asset. It's not that there are too many UX designers in the country. Not by a long shot. The country can support a hell of a lot more. There are too many people doing wireframing and prototyping. And that is what has to change. So it's the nature of broadening your skill to bring your full value to the organization that has to shift. And then we're not going to have the bubble bursting. So in a nutshell, that's pretty much what I wanted to say. 30 minutes and 23 seconds. And thank you. Any questions?